From A&E, this is Biography.
The Royal Observatory, Greenwich, England, home of the Greenwich Meridian. This is where the world keeps time. It's here in this exact spot that the old millennium will officially end and the new one begin. Hello and welcome to a very special edition of Biography. I'm Harry Smith. Tonight we begin a remarkable journey through the past 1,000 years, a special countdown of the 100 most influential people of the millennium past. We'll meet the men and women we believe have done the most to shape our world today. To help compile our list, we polled more than 300 distinguished scholars, world leaders, and journalists, and we listened to viewers like you who visited the Biography website. The choices, well, you may be surprised. You may disagree. We've been arguing about them for months. So on to the list, and remember, we're counting down in order of importance to number one, Biography's Person of the Millennium. We begin in the 1500s with a man who ruled nearly half the earth, a sultan so ruthless the mere mention of his name was enough to send Christians running for cover. Suleiman the Magnificent, number 100 as we start our millennium countdown. In an era of conquistadors and shoguns, Suleiman was the mightiest of them all. His great Ottoman Empire stretched from Baghdad to Budapest and all across the Mediterranean.
He united the Arab world, and then that united Arab world conquered most of what was then known as the civilized world. His legacy is that he is at the roots of the lack of trust, even today, between the Islamic world and the Christian world.
If his rule was born in blood and steel, Suleiman earned lasting fame by bringing his subjects government and justice, and he ushered in a golden age of Islamic arts and sciences. At the same time Suleiman was conquering the known world, a daring group of explorers was setting off into the unknown. One of the greatest of these seagoers was this man, Vasco de Gama. He was sent to sea by the King of Portugal, his mission to find a route to the riches of Asia. De Gama headed east, sailing around Africa's treacherous Cape of Good Hope. De Gama, who traveled 3 times the distance of Columbus's first voyage, blazed the first practical ocean trail from west to east, to this day linking 2 great cultures. Not since Joshua blew down the fabled walls of Jericho has the sound of a trumpet made such an impact on the world. The man who turned brass into pure gold was a poor kid from New Orleans who made music with an all-American style. Number 98, the founding father of jazz, Louis Armstrong.
Along comes Louis Armstrong with that gravelly voice and that magnificent trumpet, and you think that there was some divine wind just moving through him that made us stop in our tracks.
Armstrong's performances called worldwide attention to a new and uniquely American art form, jazz.
One of America's most popular emissaries
As a goodwill ambassador, Armstrong broke the color bar, bringing jazz all around the world. As a musical innovator, he pioneered the concept of improvisation. Not only that, his voice was one of a kind. Armstrong's style was ribbed by just about every comic impressionist, including Danny Kaye. Louis didn't mind. A lot of cats copy the Mona Lisa, he said, but people still line up to see the original. It was a threat that hung over the children of the 1950s, an epidemic that paralyzed or killed hundreds of thousands. One man put a stop to this dread disease, Dr. Jonas Salk. Salk struggled for more than 4 years to find a cure and eventually came up with the polio vaccine. It was a miracle in a test tube. Within 2 years, the polio cases in America had been cut by 80%. He would go down in history as the man who freed families from a silent terror.
Anxious parents shepherding little Johnny and little Jill to their inoculations. They're protected, and it didn't hurt a bit.
Forget the 3 tenors. Back at the beginning of this century, we needed only 1. Enrico Caruso, soaring in at number 96. Caruso was a natural talent. He didn't have a singing lesson until he was 18, but within a few years, the young Italian had become the highest paid singer in the world.
He walked out to the center of the stage and said, "Let me show you what a tenor voice really is all about." I mean, it was just there. He was like Babe Ruth of the operatic world.
Caruso's golden voice set the standard for every opera singer who followed. And because he was one of the first artists to record his music, he became internationally famous. You might even say he was one of the first superstars.
I think it brought it into the average person's home in such a way that they at least realized it could be quite thrilling. I can only imagine what it was like to hear such a full sound ringing out these high notes with no effort.
Quick, name the most famous movie star in the world. Not Greta Garbo or Marilyn Monroe, not Schwarzenegger or even Leonardo DiCaprio. He never played a superhero or a heartthrob. He was the little tramp, down at the heels but as resilient as the bamboo cane he twirled. Charlie Chaplin, number 95 of the Millennium 100.
I think he made people feel good. You know, I think the feel-good movie started with Charlie Chaplin pictures. Every once in a while, just a little flavor of Chaplin, put some spring in your step, and it was a new thing. It was a brand new art form.
Chaplin's pathos and humor could be understood in any language. In more than 80 silent films, most of which he wrote and directed, he touched a universal chord with his stories of the underdog, short of cash but never short of hope. Charlie Chaplin showed us how to thumb our nose at adversity and laugh through the tears.
Chaplin was the pioneer. We're maybe the sons of the pioneers, but he was the pathfinder.
It is the modern plague, the scourge of our times, a viral infection that kills slowly and agonizingly. Acquired immune deficiency syndrome, AIDS. Scientists now believe it began with chimpanzees of Western Africa. But the first known human victim is an African man. This so-called patient zero is number 94 and symbolizes all those who have fought not only the disease, but controversy and prejudice as well.
AIDS became a political disease, and a lot of the people that surrounded President Reagan just thought that this was a disease that affected homosexuals, didn't it, and affected drug addicts, didn't it, and didn't these people deserve what they got? And they also, I think, fully believed that if you ignored it, it might go away.
But it didn't go away. By the year 2000, it's believed that 40 million people worldwide will be living with AIDS.
Which is the most valuable is that you stand on your own 2 feet, that nobody else is going to do the things which are yours to be done in the world.
She was the voice of the downtrodden, the first lady of the world, Eleanor Roosevelt. She was born into a political family and married her distant cousin, Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Her marriage to Franklin was a challenging one, but it was a great partnership, and she kept growing from it. She never quit growing.
When FDR was stricken with polio in 1921, Eleanor encouraged him to fight back. In 1933, their joint resolve led him to the White House, where she served as the eyes and ears of the president.
She influenced the way that not only the president but the rest of his government looked at problems. Many people wanted to forget the Depression because of, the drag that it put on our economy. She kept going down coal mines and reminding people there were still many, many Americans left out.
After her husband's death at the end of World War II, Eleanor Roosevelt went to work for the fledgling United Nations.
This Universal Declaration of Human Rights may well become the international Magna Carta of all men everywhere.
To this day, Eleanor Roosevelt remains a beacon, a worldwide symbol of hope, freedom, and equality. Like Eleanor Roosevelt, number 92 on our list also championed the poor and the sick, and she never hesitated to get her hands dirty. In 1854, Florence Nightingale brought nurses to Turkey to help British troops wounded in the Crimean War. She was shocked by the filth and disease, but reduced the hospital mortality rate to only 2%. The soldier she nursed called Nightingale the Lady with a Lamp.
One test of the importance of an individual is, do their names become metaphors for who they are? So if we say somebody's a Florence Nightingale now, there's never any question what we mean. We mean somebody who ministers to someone else with the purpose of making them better.
Nightingale didn't just save a handful of men. She set the standard for clean, safe hospitals around the world. Standards we continue to rely on today. He was initially turned down from film school, but he would become the storyteller to the world, the most powerful man in Hollywood.
Jaws.
Artist, magician, impresario, Steven Spielberg.
I think Steven Spielberg should be on this list because he's an extraordinary creative man. That he has this incredible range of things that he's done. And I think the best is yet to come.
Like a Dickens or a Disney, Spielberg is a master of the tale, thrilling millions with Close Encounters and Indiana Jones, and moving us with Saving Private Ryan, and of course, E.T.
He started off making these extraordinary, adventures and
fun, good. Yeah, points, yes.
And now it seems he's just, I think especially with Schindler's, it changed. He kicked into some deep level of himself, and it's been like that ever since.
Steven Spielberg's artistry doesn't just entertain us, it reminds us on a global scale of humanity's potential and its pain. Without number 90 on our list, Steven Spielberg might never have lifted a viewfinder. Next time you pose for a family photograph, you can say cheese, but you should be saying Daguerre, Louis Daguerre. He invented the first practical method of photography, the daguerreotype, and gave us a new way of seeing through the lens of a camera. Photography captured a slice of the world and brought it home, allowing us to see places and events in images more immediate and realistic than we'd ever seen before.
Most dramatic step to date in women's campaign for equal rights, women who register and vote.
They called her an anarchist. They called her a man-hater. But it's because of number 89, the sturdy Quaker named Susan B. Anthony, that women in the United States have the right to vote. In an 1872 election, she marched up to the ballot box and voted. She was immediately arrested and fined $100, which she refused to pay. Anthony became America's premier suffragette, focusing the country's attention on equal rights for women. Her struggle would win them the rights they cherish to this day. The New Mexico desert, on a mid-July morning in 1945. Scientists are about to unleash a force unlike anything ever known. One blinding flash, and the world would never be the same. The atomic bomb was born, and the man described as its father, J. Robert Oppenheimer, would spend the rest of his life grappling with what he had done. Oppenheimer is number 88 on the Millennium 100. When World War II began, he was assigned to head the top-secret Manhattan Project as America raced to build the bomb.
Oppenheimer belongs on the list because he was the man who orchestrated it. He was the man, he was the director of the symphony orchestra. The orchestra played the symphony of fission, the symphony of making bombs.
On August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, killing more than 70,000 men, women, and children. The knowledge tortured Oppenheimer to his dying day.
I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds. I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
Imagine a world where no birds sing, a planet so poisoned that every sip of water, every bite of food could kill. Were it not for Rachel Carson, that might be our Earth. Rachel Carson, a quiet marine biologist, was the Paul Revere of the environmental movement. She sounded a warning about pesticides in her landmark book, Silent Spring. The chemical industry branded Carson a radical, a subversive. But her quiet eloquence and thorough research eventually won out. Congress heeded her warning and passed legislation to vastly restrict the use of pesticides. Unfortunately, by then, Rachel Carson was mortally ill with cancer. But she died changing attitudes and teaching the world how to treat our global home with respect. Banned in America, reviled in Ireland, but James Joyce, number 86 on our list, revolutionized modern literature. Joyce left his Irish birthplace early on for a life of European exile. Over the coming years, his writing would get more experimental, more radical. His masterpieces, Ulysses and Finnegan's Wake, are novels of such confounding language and style, experts are still struggling to decode them.
I think that many people talk a great deal about James Joyce who've hardly managed to make their way through Ulysses and who, probably like me, have never read Finnegan's Wake. So he is more of a symbol, an icon, a national hero. He made difficulty fashionable.
Joyce's novels shocked the public with their frank sexuality and wild mix of random thoughts and pure emotion. Literature hasn't been the same since.
Here's great news about two wonderful Baraxo hand cleaning products.
Actor, governor, president, number 85 on our list is Ronald Reagan.
Reagan? Yeah, it didn't seem to me he belongs on the list. Ask Henry Kissinger that question.
He was exactly the right man for that period.
To ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire to simply...
Reagan makes our list because of his achievements in foreign policy. He is credited by many for hastening the downfall of the communist bloc.
I think Ronald Reagan was a seminal figure in the final collapse of the Soviet Union and in the beginning of the Cold War and the national order.
Master of the photo op, Reagan stood at the Berlin Wall and challenged his Russian counterpart to do the right thing.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Reagan's demands and threats had an impact. The wall tumbled down and the Cold War was over.
Wax program with Fibber McGee and Molly.
It's said that when our number 84, Guglielmo Marconi, was en route to Britain at the turn of the century, he was stopped at customs. Officials thought his black boxes were bombs. They had them destroyed. The devices young Marconi carried were explosive, but not the way the officers imagined. They were an invention that would change the way the world communicates: radio. At the age of 21, Marconi figured out how to send a message through the air without wires. And within a short time, he was transmitting all the way across the Atlantic.
The invention of radio essentially removed us from the shackles of wires and connections. It creates radio and television. It creates cellular telephony.
Since its invention, wireless has saved numberless ships and human lives from ocean disaster.
One poignant example, the Titanic. When the great ship went down, distress calls were sent out. Of course, many died, but over 700 survived, thanks to Marconi and his invention. He was a giant of a man in every way, and he would single-handedly drag his country out of the Middle Ages. Peter the Great, Tsar of Russia. Peter imported European scholars and craftsmen to work and teach. He founded the Russian Navy and won his landlocked country a path to the sea. Of course, he could be a tyrant. Progress was bought with excessive taxation and slave labor. But when Peter the Great was finished, Russia had become a superpower. Number 82 is this man, Niels Bohr, master physicist, father of quantum theory, decoder of the atom's powerful secrets.
Bohr was the first one to understand how an atom is put together.
Bohr fled the Nazis during the war and brought his research with him, helping make the A-bomb a reality. For the rest of his life, Bohr devoted himself to obliterating the horror he helped create and waged a worldwide campaign for peace.
Mandela insisted on walking so people could see him. The silver-haired black leader with his wife at his side waved to the huge crowd.
It was one of the most thrilling events of the decade, a February day in 1990 when Nelson Mandela was freed. Mandela had been imprisoned for 27 years. His crime, opposition to South Africa's vicious system of apartheid, racial segregation at the point of a gun. Even in solitary confinement, Mandela's voice was heard and worldwide opinion rallied to his cause. When they freed Mandela, they freed his country. In South Africa's first democratic election, blacks and whites came together to elect him president. His first act was to open his arms to those who had imprisoned him.
I think the message, he was in jail for 27 years. He came out without bitterness, open and prepared to work with those who locked him up. And given what is happening on the African continent, you ask yourself, why can't they learn from him? Why can't they get his message?
I crown thee, Elizabeth, Queen of England, Ireland, and France. God save your majesty.
She was the most powerful woman Europe had ever seen. Elizabeth I, Queen of England, number 80 on our list. She was remarkably modern, a quick-witted politician, and one of the first great spin doctors.
She was someone who was brilliant at propaganda. She went on these progresses through England. She would come and talk to ordinary people. She was dazzling. She was a great speaker. So she was a wonderful image maker.
Her subjects adored her. A striking figure and a hands-on leader, she became one of the first cult personalities in the Western world. Elizabeth reigned for 45 years, and in that time, she pushed her nation to conquer half the world. The sun would not set on her British Empire for the next 5 centuries.
Stalin was a psychopath in power, with an enormous army, with absolute control of information in people's minds in a way that to us is unimaginable.
He started out studying for the priesthood, but he became one of the most merciless dictators in the world. The blood of some 30 million people is on his hands. Joseph Stalin, premier of the Soviet Union.
He was a maniac who committed heinous acts, wiped out generations of intellectuals and clergy.
Stalin crushed his country, then recast it as an industrial giant. When World War II ended, he provoked the Cold War that would consume the planet for the next 45 years.
The damage that Stalin wrought, and the damage that he set in place even after his death, will continue to haunt the Soviet Union and now Russia for decades to come.
She opened new worlds. She destroyed old worlds. Number 78, Queen Isabella I, didn't just bankroll Christopher Columbus, she did much more, and not always for the better.
Isabella did help shape modern Spain as we know it. She married Ferdinand of Aragon, and between them, they created a more effective, a more coherent kingdom than had ever existed before.
But Isabella also cast a shadow over Europe, for she set in motion the Spanish Inquisition. Thousands of Jews and Muslims were killed, tortured, and forced to flee. On foreign shores, Isabella's funding would lead to the opening of the New World, a breakthrough in exploration and later exploitation, as Spanish conquistadors eventually conquered nearly all of Central and South America. He was one of the great political and social thinkers of all time, English philosopher Thomas Hobbes. His classic work, published in 1651, was called Leviathan, named after that unruly monster, the great unwashed masses.
For Thomas Hobbes, we're all innately evil people. We live with original sin. We're nasty, greedy, and the only way to hold us back, the only way to have stability, the only way to have peace, if there's an all-powerful state.
But Hobbes did not believe in the divine right of kings. It wasn't the will of God that justifies a monarchy, Hobbes declared. It was the will of the people. A revolutionary thought, and one that almost got Hobbes beheaded. But he survived to establish the principles that continue to fuel our thinking about government to this day. We call it the rule of law. July 6, 1957. John Winston Lennon, 16, was introduced to James Paul McCartney, 15. Together, they would rock our world and become the new leaders of a cultural revolution. They're number 76 on our list, Johnny and the Moondogs, later named the Beatles. These working-class kids from Liverpool were hungry for recognition and stardom. When they hit in late 1963, it was with an intensity so fierce, the media invented a word for it, Beatlemania.
The Beatles. This rock and roll group has taken over as the kingpins of musical appreciation among the younger element.
The so-called Fab Four were so wildly successful, they could take chances with their music few other groups would dare, and the fans were with them every beat.
George Harrison, Ringo Starr.
In the end, the Beatles
John
reinvented a musical form and were in the forefront of a social uprising, featuring sex, drugs, and rock and roll. And speaking of sex and drugs, you've probably never heard of our next person. But this doctor and researcher had a huge impact on you and everyone around you. Because Gregory Pincus was, excuse the expression, the father of the birth control pill.
Pincus did what was at that time very important, because he took this idea that conception can be regulated, and he actually in the laboratory and with his particular medical knowledge and know-how developed that pill.
First on sale in 1960, Pincus's contraceptive pill completely redefined how we think about sex. It also helped curb the world's growing population.
It's a bomb. Duck and cover. Paul and Patty know what to do.
He opened the door to the nuclear age. Number 74, Master of Radioactivity, Enrico Fermi. The Italian-born Fermi won the Nobel Prize for Physics in 1938. On the way to pick up the award, he and his family defected, escaping Mussolini's Italy. Fermi went to work on the Manhattan Project and created the first self-sustaining chain reaction.
An atomic chain reaction works in exactly the same way.
It was the grandfather of the reactors that fuel today's power plants, and it also moved us a giant step closer to the specter of nuclear annihilation.
Remember what to do, friends. Now tell me right out loud. What are you supposed to do when you see the flash?
The next person on our list may surprise you. It's Diana, Princess of Wales. Of course, her life and death are so fresh in our minds, it seems premature to speculate what history will say about Diana in the coming years.
I'm astonished that anybody voted for Diana, frankly. This is pure sentimentality based on the recent sadness of her death.
Fleeting as her life was, the future may record that the failed marriage of Diana and Charles does represent a watershed, perhaps the beginning of the end of the British monarchy.
Somehow, Princess Diana represented for very ordinary people a rebellion against the royal family. And I think that the British people loved her for being a thorn in the flesh.
Diana used her position to work with AIDS sufferers, children, the poor, and to campaign against landmines. Above all, as this millennium comes to a close, Diana may represent the quintessential media celebrity of our time, symbolizing the way the world has been turned into a global village, a place where the passing of a star is mourned by an entire planet. He was called the Liberator. General and statesman, he chased the Spanish out of his native South America. His name is Simón Bolívar, and he's number 72 of our Millennium 100. He freed Venezuela, Ecuador, and the country that would bear his name, Bolivia.
He allowed South America to free itself of the dictatorial influence of European countries. But, oh, by the way, on the other hand, Simón Bolívar was a pretty tough dictator in his own right.
Although he sowed the seeds of freedom, Bolívar's iron-fisted rule of Peru and Colombia laid the groundwork for repressive regimes to follow.
Harriet Tubman is an important figure in American history because she represents someone from the most powerless class in American society, who through the sheer force of her personality and her will helped transform the lives of hundreds of people.
Former slave Harriet Tubman, the conductor of one of the most dramatic rescues in history, the Underground Railroad. There were no real trains on the Underground Railroad. In the years before the Civil War, it was a network of blacks and whites smuggling slaves out of the South.
She had a bounty on her head that reached upwards, I think, of $40,000 at one point. She became friends with noted abolitionists of the day. And it was tremendously psychologically important to have a black person operating in America at that time as a force for change.
Harriet Tubman shows just how far women and men were willing to go to end one of the worst evils of all time, slavery. Everyone's heard about the separation of church and state, but one man invented it. And he was a pope, our number 70, Pope Gregory VII. When he came to power in 1073, Gregory was determined to drag the Catholic Church out of the Middle Ages and clean up corruption. For years, kings had been selling church positions to the highest bidder. Priests had been selling indulgences to their congregations. When Gregory tried to end these corrupt practices, he was forced to flee Rome. But the die was cast, and Gregory's reforms would prevail, bringing the church back to its original purpose, the worship of God. In 1628, Dr. William Harvey wrote a short pamphlet describing the human body's circulatory system. Many believe it's the most important medical text ever written. Until Harvey, doctors believed blood was manufactured by the liver, moving back and forth through the body like the tides of an ocean.
The reason people wear wedding rings on this finger is it was thought in the old days that there was a special vein that went all the way from there right directly to the heart. Harvey made it clear that all the veins go back to the heart, not just that one from the finger.
William Harvey discovered that blood constantly circulates through the body, pumped by the heart. His explanation of the heart and circulatory system was revolutionary, the bedrock on which modern physiology, the study of how our body functions, is built.
Well, Franklin is a remarkable human being. He's the quintessential American because he did everything.
Benjamin Franklin, number 68, inventor, ambassador, postmaster, and even insurance salesman. He was America's Renaissance man.
Franklin discovered electricity, invented the lightning rod, invented the Franklin stove, invented the bifocal glasses, and did all that while getting wealthy, being a printer, and writing an annual almanac.
Benjamin Franklin, who was brilliant and a little ornery, is sometimes looked at more as a scientist and an author than as the statesman and the diplomat that he was.
Franklin played a key role in America's Revolution and helped draft the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
Franklin is quintessentially that inquisitive, curious, driving energy, which is at the heart of the American experience.
Say, kids, what time is it? Ho, 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 ho! Well, howdy, doody, kids. Well, howdy, Mr. Doody.
He didn't invent television, but Vladimir Zworykin brought it into our living rooms. He went to work for RCA and told his new boss he would need $100,000 to perfect his electronic system. He wound up spending $200 million, but he changed the world. Today, for each baby born, a television set is built. That's $250,000 every day. By the time they're teens, those kids have spent 3 years in front of the tube. You can thank or blame Vladimir Zworykin. The first motion pictures were short, silent films with simple plots and crude camera work. Number 66 on our list changed all that. Writer-director W Griffith brought storytelling to the screen, using sophisticated photography, lighting, and editing to create full-length features.
Griffith created
tremendous appetite in the general public. He put things on the screen that no one had ever imagined, let alone seen before.
Griffith's landmark film was the epic Birth of a Nation, though hailed at the time, it shocks us today with its racial stereotypes.
At the time Birth of a Nation came out, even though it was a racist movie, D.W. Griffith was the symbol of the potential of the film medium for good or for ill.
His politics were questionable, but his gift was obvious. D.W. Griffith turned movies into a form of art. Werner Heisenberg holds the number 65 spot on our Millennium list. He's the brain behind quantum mechanics and the famed uncertainty principle. Unlike many European physicists, he stayed in his native Germany throughout World War II. Of course, America beat Hitler to the bomb, but today many believe that's thanks to Heisenberg himself, that he sabotaged the development of the Nazi A-bomb. In the post-war years, Heisenberg's contributions in quantum mechanics would come to be widely appreciated, for it is the study of how energy works, the science of the everyday world.
Pablo Picasso is the single greatest artist of the 20th century and the 19th and the 18th. And
Pablo Picasso, number 64. Prodigious painter, sculptor, potter, and artist. In his 91 years, he produced some 20,000 works in a mind-boggling variety of styles. And more than that, he changed all the rules.
I think he'll go down in history as another Leonardo. I mean, Leonardo had so many strings to his bow, and he was a scientist as well as an artist and a sculptor and a creator of new technologies and so on. And I think the same thing with Picasso. I mean, that he managed to transform the whole face of art.
Visionary, revolutionary, and chameleon, Picasso shattered conventions and fragmented space. And when he was done, he had redefined the face of both painting and sculpture. Art is not the truth, he said. It's a lie that allows us to approach the truth. Number 63 on our list is the witty, perceptive, and still enormously popular English author Jane Austen. She produced only 6 novels in her short lifetime, all published anonymously, but her insight into the human condition is extraordinary.
Jane Austen is important in that she created the novel of manners, the woman's novel, the novel that elevated private life into a matter of intense importance.
Austen had a keen eye for the society of the English countryside and a perfect ear for the foibles of her genteel class.
She totally captures that world and the class of it, the relationships of it. I think an amazing writer.
She's made it possible for women to write about certain kinds of subject matter. Women, families, country villages, small movements of the soul. These are important.
I love
them. And so they are.